Namaskar, this is Aadi, and welcome to Dev Talks. I have with me today Cleo Paskal, my friend from, I won't say Canada, but from Australia.
You're very kind to even consider having a friend from Canada at this point.
No. I
But
do have friends. I have family in Canada as well.
okay,
It's not that I hate Canada. I mean, I just don't like the dispensation which is there.
okay.
Welcome to the show.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
So let's start with Trump's tariff war. That's what I wanted to get your opinion because you track South China Sea, you track the Indo-Pacific pretty closely, you track China as well. What is the reaction in China? How are they going to take this Trump's salvo, and what he's saying is just the beginning of the game. So how do you think the Chinese are reacting to it? Because their reactions in terms of the tariffs that they've put across are pathetic. I mean, it sounds very big, but when you look at the trade, it's pathetic. There's nothing. 1%, 2%.
Yeah. There's two different types of tariffs. So first of all, it's sort of things are moving so quickly. We almost need not just a date stamp, but like an hour and minute stamp. So I mean, all of this could be out of date by the time we finish chatting. But the way it stands now, there were the tariffs or the threat of the tariffs against Mexico and Canada and the tariffs against China were very different in nature. Um, the ones against Canada and Mexico were designed to achieve a very specific short-term goal, which they did. And the one against China is all of them were related to fentanyl, but the one against China, even though the amount was lower, 10% versus 25%, is much more enduring, and there was an element of it that is going to potentially cause a lot of problems for for exporters, which is getting rid of the de minimis exemption. So packages coming in that had a value of less than $800 weren't being searched or subject to customs. The In this tariff package against China, that's been done away with. So all of those, so of course China was gaming the system, and a lot of those Amazon sellers, for example, who are selling low cost goods in competition with U.S. goods, weren't paying customs, and who else knows what was coming in with those packages. So that element of that executive order is a pretty big hit for the PRC. The and part of it is economic. Now they're going to have to pay something, and their packages can be searched, and it changes that whole game. And also, I think the idea is that it may uh, affect some of the ability to ship the drugs in direct from China. Although a lot of it was the precursors were going to Canada or Mexico and then coming in physically across the border. But the whole using the postal service to undermine U.S. security. Now the U.S. has done away with a loophole that was allowing a lot of really bad stuff to come in. So apart from the tariffs, which may escalate, that element of it, where those packages now can be stopped, searched, seized, is potentially a pretty big thing.
Is it just that, because packages is one way that the stuff is coming inside America? What statistics are showing is that the Canadian border is supposed to be more porous. There have been more busts in that area. There have been more. The drug bust quantum is higher in the Canadian border. I think the terrorist catch ratio was about 280 in the last year on the Canadian border and about 180 in the Mexican border.
Yeah.
So is that all that will take for Trump to kind of this thing? Because it seems like a band-aid on a bullet wound.
As you mean for the Canadian border thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
So
the flow of fentanyl, if that's what the main goal is,
mhm.
just this won't really help.
Well, the packages have to do with China. What Canada and Mexico have now both promised is, around 10,000 people to secure the border and putting in new tech and all that sort of stuff. So we'll see, and that's why we've got a 30-day. Canada and Mexico have a 30-day reprieve to see whether that can get sorted out. So the Canada and Mexico tariffs, which are functionally sanctions, or threat of sanctions, are designed to force action to secure the physical border. The ones against the one being levied against China, part of it is trade, but part of it is trying to secure the postal or the that, because there's no physical border with China, but a lot of it's coming in through mail, along with other stuff. So uh, we'll see in 30 days whether the northern border has become more secure and the southern border has become more secure. Um, and we'll start to see what they're finding coming in the mail from China. I say, by the way, there is another border. There's the western U.S. border. Remember the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, which is part of the U.S., Saipan and Tinian, and they still have a situation where Chinese nationals can arrive without a B1 or B2 visa. And they've now, it used to be until a month or two ago that there was no visa at all required. Now there's some sort of electronic form they need to do online, but it's pretty perfunctory. And they're still uh, finding that they're not supposed to leave the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, but they're finding recently they found a little over half a dozen who arrived by boat in Guam. W- I've heard that once they get to Guam, some of them can quite easily get Guamanian IDs and then are working for contractors on U.S. military bases. So I would also encourage a little more attention to that Western border. This is something that members of Congress wrote a letter to the previous Homeland Secretary about. And with any luck, the new Homeland Secretary, Secretary Nome, will somebody will tell her about it, because as soon as they hear about it, they're definitely, this is something that can be done without legislation. This is just a Homeland directive that can be sorted out without any problem. And then hopefully at that point, PRC nationals will require B1 or B2 visas like they do everywhere else in the United States. So the point is that there's a lot going on all over. There's porousness everywhere, and we'll see what gets plugged and how it gets plugged as things progress.
Let's talk about the Indo-Pacific. The sheer factor that Secretary Rubio had the first meeting, which was first, I would say, geopolitical meeting in a broad sense, was the Quad. Um, China wasn't happy, of course, and the positioning of the Trump government itself, which is hard. It's tough, uh, and all of the people that are there are supposed to be China hawks, in quotes. Um, how do you think China plans to navigate this game forward?
Things are moving extremely quickly. So, for example, a couple days ago or a few days ago, um, they announced a chief of staff for the House Foreign Affairs Committee, um, who was a guy who had previously worked for two major Chinese firms as a lobbyist, and and then it got out on Twitter, and within hours he was no longer the new chief of staff for House Foreign Affairs Committee, right? Um, and similarly, there are a lot. If you're concerned about the PRC, as I am, there are a lot of hires that are very reassuring, and then there are others, including in DoD, that are maybe less reassuring. So I think things are still in formation. It's very hard to tell. It hasn't been the immediate priority has been very much um, what they call dismantling the administrative state, or getting control over the levers of power in Washington. So as that's progressing. I think as that settles in, as more of the confirmations go through, then we'll start to see more what the actual policies are. But Rubio's, Rubio's on the record about China for a long time. Hegseth, in his first note to the military, mentioned the communist Chinese. Um, it's indicative of a pretty strong stance. And from what I understand, President Trump himself, at least in part, credits the loss of the 2020 election to to China and COVID. And that's there was a lot of other things involved, obviously, but the economy was doing fine. Things were humming along, you know, just okay, very well. And under those sorts of circumstances, an incumbent president would expect to be reelected. And then along came this virus that trashed the economy and threw everything into disarray. And so, uh, I've heard that this is I'm in DC now. You hear a lot of rumors. Uh, I could hear a different rumor tomorrow that could make me think that I'm wrong today. But as of this exact moment, what I understand is that uh, President Trump uh, thinks that the Chinese and COVID, which is one of the reasons why you're seeing a lot of release, I think, of information about COVID now, coming out of uh, CIA Director Radcliffe, and just about kind of some of the background to it, because I think this is something that's been living and if you remember, actually, President Trump was quite sick with COVID as well. So my understanding is that certainly has affected his opinion about the PRC. He is a negotiator, so he might give some openings to, or seem like he's, or whatever, giving some openings to China. But from what I understand, he certainly hasn't forgotten what the Chinese Communist Party is and has done to his country and to his presidency.
Yeah, it's going to be a little more personal. Seems like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's they immediately went after all the FBI agents who were involved in the cases against Trump. And they're currently putting together lists of the thousands of FBI agents who are involved in the J6 investigations and prosecutions. This is pretty direct.
It's personal.
Yeah. So we'll see. But but then when you look at some of the staffing, anyways, this is very early days. Definitely very early days.
As true as that is, he also has pretty less time, right? Because he has to do all this stuff before 1.5 years, before the Senate elections come across. He has to hit his policy. He has to establish himself, because otherwise the people are going to ask him questions. What the hell are you doing? We sent you to change America. It's not changing. So I guess he's in a rush as well. What do you think his Taiwan policy is?
I don't. Again, I don't know. We'll need to see it as it develops, because it's there's, you look at Bridge Colby, for example, being put into planning, and he's somebody who's very focused on China, but his positions on Taiwan is, it's we could go through the list of Hegseth or Colby or whomever, Byers, whoever, but it's up to President Trump. And I just haven't seen anything that would make me feel like I have a sense one way or another. I mean, he's talking about putting tariffs on Taiwan um, as well, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be a defense of Taiwan. I just don't know. I really don't know. Um, uh, if you remember, just to go back to the kind of President Trump and India thing, his presidency was the one that resurrected the Quad. And of the initial of those four leaders, only President Trump and Prime Minister Modi are left. Right. So the relationship with Prime Minister Modi is old and aligned. So for me, the relationship with India is on a very solid foundation, and you'll hear even people like, for example, Steve Bannon, who have very strong opinions on the H-1B visa situation, are very careful on the show to talk about their respect for Modi and for India as a country. Right. So there's a disaggregation between domestic America first type policies and geostrategic importance of India in terms of that relationship. And if that's the case, and there's a similar, you know, kind of valuation relationship with Japan, like things happen. Like, I don't understand the objection to Japan to Nippon Steel's investment in U.S. Steel. I
See,
don't. There was especially because President Trump said, if you want to invest $1 billion, we're going to make things easy for you, but then they block that. So I think that things are kind of working their way through. But the reason that I kind of went through that little background on the India thing is, India is very Indian strategic community is very aware of the dynamics in the Indo-Pacific, and there are obviously influences within the U.S. that President Trump will listen to and then make his own decisions on. But there will also be discussions with important allies like India about what's important in the Indo-Pacific, and we may see that developing in certain directions as well.
I've kind of pictured the world in four uh, segments, and I call them the four gundas or the bullies of the world. There's going to be the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Indians, where he will have to do some hard, polite, tough negotiations, because each one of them has a certain sway in their region, in their geopolitical baseline. Russia has that energy, this and that. China has the trade. India has the global south. So there's that aspect of it that he'll have to deal with. But what do you think is his uh, even himself? He's called Modi the tariff king. uh, Post that, there was an answer that was given from here that we will do what it takes in our country. We don't care what you say. After that, he's not mentioned anything. Then there's been we know that there've been back end discussions between the Trump team and India for 3 months now. And Jaishankar didn't kind of slip it out, but he hinted towards it in one of his recent conversations. What do you think the conversations are like? What are they talking about?
That's way above my pay grade.
No, I'm just saying, when you look,
What do you think there? But you probably have a better idea than I do. You
I mean, for
undoubtedly
me,
have a
it's
better idea than
for
I
me,
do.
it's if you look at it, it's Russia, it's the West Asian crisis, it's China, um, it's of course Bangladesh, Khalistan, and all these things. But geopolitically, I feel it's going to be one of these issues, because the Iran question has India's interest, the Russian question has India's interest, the Israeli question has India's interest, the Chinese question has India's interest. So there is what I'm trying to ask you is, because the kind of conversions of interests that you're seeing in especially the American foreign policy and Indian interests in within the global space, if I may, it's quite high. So it's quite evident that he would want to deal with India because, well, there are interests. So if he has interests, I can make use of him. If he's an actual deal maker, as what he says he is, and I truly believe he is, um, I'd go with the guy who's got the most interest in the region. Come, man, let's sit down, let's talk. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want?
Hmm. Yeah, and
So
I mean, I'd say that just going back to your four bullies thing, there's one that isn't like the others. You know, China is not like the other three. It's just not. It will not. The Chinese Communist Party cannot live in a world where it can possibly be threatened. So it needs to kneecap the other three. I mean, in bluntly. India and the US can compete, but they're not trying to destroy each other. Yeah, the Russia is its own whole thing. But I think and it can cause a lot of problems. And it has very good networks globally. Um, but it's not uh, it's it it's it's not the Chinese Communist Party. It doesn't have the uh, the power of the Chinese Communist Party globally, right? So in that context, the alignment of interests between the U.S. and India, as you're saying, I think is quite strong, and fundamentally, if Trump 1.0 is any indication, the what they want is a world at peace where you can just have trade, right? And ideally trade that benefits the U.S. They're not. It's not a charity, but they want free and open Indo-Pacific that facilitates American prosperity. But they don't want. They want to be secure, but they don't They don't want to have their fingers in every little pie unless that pie is poisonous to them. That's just Trump. That's what Trump 1.0 was like. So if this is the same, they don't they don't care. I mean, if anything, the past is to go by. Yeah, if India's doing whatever it's doing in its own sphere of influence, because what India, from what I understand, is trying to accomplish in the region is very similar, to create a zone of uh, peace, where where extremism is under control and Chinese influence is limited, and there's economic growth within India uh, for for the last man in line. And if India is growing economically, all of its neighbors grow economically as well. So I think the ultimate goal from how I understand what uh, what the current administration in India is trying to accomplish is, yes, it's going to try to protect its economy from the U.S. more than the U.S. would want, and those sorts of disagreements. But at a very fundamental level, geostrategic level, the alignment is pretty strong. That's definitely not the case with China. Um, Sorry, it looks like you're looking at. Do you have?
no, I mean, I'm kind of interested at the alignment, and that's an interesting word, and that's what triggered a thought to me. It's going to be more about interest and alignment. I think that's a very interesting way of putting it. When you look at Trump's policy with his neighbors, uh, he seems to be establishing the American supremacy back within his continent with the whole game with Canada, and which literally forced Trudeau to resign. I mean, at the end of it, uh, that's the
I,
reality.
I think there were other things
Other
that
things as well,
yeah.
but this was like probably the straw that broke the back finally. The tariffs and this and that with what's her name, Chrystia Freeland, kind of saying thank
Yeah,
you
I
so
think
much.
I think they knew the election was coming up, and if Freeland is going to position herself to run against him, then she needed to make a big move that created distance. And these people are not individuals; they're working as they're part of systems.
Yeah,
So the Liberal Party system probably knew that Trudeau couldn't run again, and so needed to save itself and to reposition itself. And this is the year where we have to have an election in Canada. So the whatever the inciting incident was, I think that the timing, it was just a matter of timing. Um, but I think that just to take a step back about what the goal of the Mexican and Canada and the Canadian thing was, I actually take him at his word. This is about securing the United States. I mean, his demand from Canada wasn't, huge trade concessions. It was tighten up your borders, you dangerous morons. I mean, it was, you know, it wasn't more complicated than that. And frankly, Canada should have been doing that for years. I mean, we should not have had a dangerous border. It's not good for Canada. It's not good for the US, but it's not good for Canada either. And Canada has a lot of problems in its legislation. There's some very good retired RCMP officers who've talked about how it's very difficult to prosecute um, organized crime in Canada just because of the way the legislation is, and there doesn't seem to be a desire to adjust the legislation. So this isn't my position, isn't particularly popular one among many of my friends and relatives in Canada, but our border should have been secure. And if it takes Trump to threaten tariffs to make our borders secure, then I'm grateful. I mean, we can't. Fentanyl is killing 70 to 75,000 Americans a year. It's more than the Vietnam War. It destroys families, it destroys communities. It's become a very serious problem in Canada. We should be trying to solve that problem. And I wish that the discussion within Canada when this happened would have been more about that. Why is this a problem? I ran into somebody in an airport as it happened, who's a former, very high-ranking Canadian government official, and we had this discussion, and I said, "This is a real problem," and he said, Why do you think it's a problem? According to our numbers, there isn't a problem with fentanyl going from Canada into the US." And I said, "Well, that's not what I understand, and that's not what was testified at in the Cullen Commission, and that's not what it has been." Anyway, but the point is that we aren't even Canada isn't even really having this discussion, just like it didn't have the Kalistani discussion, right? So if this is what's forcing it didn't work. We still aren't really having that discussion. And I mean, I have Canadian colleagues who are refusing to buy American goods and are boycotting, U.S. products, and because they believe, I don't know what they believe, but they they believe something different than I believe about the how dangerous the situation at the Canadian border is. So we've got, whatever it is, a month to try to fix it. And for the sake of Canada, I hope we fix it. And if it took, you know, this pressure point from the US to do it, then I guess that's what it took. So anyway, that's a very long and rambling answer about that. But I don't think, I think that it really wasn't about trade. It was about security. And it wasn't about throwing around the presidential weight. I think he was actually concerned about the fentanyl coming into the U.S. from Canada and Mexico, and now he's got two countries that have said they're going to help him save American lives, as opposed to just allowing this poison to flow across their borders in a manner that could have been stopped, at least to a certain degree.
The interesting thing to me is that this is something that is obviously hitting Canada as well. It's not that it's US is the only kind of sorry for the terrible word, but benefactor of it. I mean, I don't get anything else in my mind. It's been hitting Canada as well, and the kind of stuff we see on Canadian streets with people hung over that, and it's quite sad to see, actually. I mean, and Canada was a beautiful country, lovely people, beautiful country. Just sometime, anyways, when we look at this whole, isn't Trump opening too many fronts at the same time geopolitically?
So this is the term that they use is flood the zone.
Yeah.
And I would love to be sitting inside some Beijing strategic planning office, watching them try to incorporate all of these moves into their meticulous planning and all this. Like it's quite amazing. It's he's opening up. They are opening up a lot of different fronts, and it's if, like me, you're concerned about the Chinese Communist Party, this is something that they're going to have a very hard time triangulating. I mean, you and I are going, what are they doing? What's going on? What's going to happen next? Beijing is hopefully doing the same thing. What's the Taiwan policy? I'm hope that China doesn't know what the Taiwan policy is, because I would hope that would affect their decision making on moving. I mean, you see the infrastructure they're putting in, the military infrastructure they're putting in, that Pentagon times 8 or whatever it is, and the whatever generation fighters they're putting up and all that stuff. I mean, they're building to fight, and I hope that they're only going to fight if they think they're going to win. And I hope that this administration is confusing those calculations.
That's an interesting perspective, I must say. When you look at anybody who would want to kind of do something, you would wonder that he would try and play an opposite game, and that's what the Chinese try and do, always kind of deflect. Their policy of deflection is something I really appreciate. Honestly, it's interesting. That's why when China goes that way, I look the other side and see, okay, what's he actually doing here? So his whole engagement within the South China Sea and this and that, how do you see that going forward? Because you also have countries within the region that have decided enough. And with Trump coming in, a lot of countries are feeling emboldened to kind of stand up to China and say, get lost. Is that the reality as what is being portrayed in the media, especially in the South China Sea media? Or
go ahead.
Being that Trump is a deal maker, a lot of countries will say, okay, I don't know what this guy is going to do.
So
what are the chances? The reason I'm asking you this is, what are the chances China takes advantage of this?
I mean, it might, but I mean, just to give a timeline for, I mean, I don't know when this is. No. I don't know when this is going to go out. But just a few hours ago, Trump held a press conference where he said the U.S. was going to take over Gaza. So, all of those tunnels that I think the Chinese probably helped build, and all, and all the backing that they gave, how are they going to figure those into their calculation? I mean, as you said, China has been assisting, if not lighting fires, assisting fires to burn in a lot of different places, and now you have these things that I mean, I that wasn't on my bingo card. No. So, uh, so I just
I mean, to
who
me it
knows?
was. To me it was. Honestly, it didn't. It's not a surprise to me.
Well, it's a surprise to me because one of the things that America First has consistently said is we're not going to get involved abroad in that kind of in
Israel is America. Come on.
it's n- not like this. Not
Israel is
actually.
America. I mean, come on. Let's face the
It's
facts. Let's face the facts. How did Trump actually win this election? Without the Jewish lobby?
uh,
Nah.
yeah,
Without the IPAC? Not
no,
gonna happen.
I disagree.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. The coalition that came together in places like Pennsylvania, for example, if you look at the swing states,
Hmm.
those were coalitions of very, very diverse groups of people that were brought to the polls by people like Scott Pressler or Charlie Kirk, going with the youth vote. It was Amish, it was Hispanic. I mean, if there's anything that was really kind of determinative, uh, the Hispanic, the male Hispanic vote, the black male vote, he brought together a coalition that is just remarkable. And I mean, it's uh, it was a lot of working class people who hadn't voted Republican in maybe ever, generational Democrats, people who normally don't vote. They specifically targeted the not just low propensity voter, but no propensity voter, people that hadn't voted in the last 4 election cycles. So you had ground game uh, things like I think what was it called, 10x the vote, something where they had because they've got very good databases. There's a guy called Rich Barris who's a pollster, and he describes in great detail how this worked. And I think he worked in part on building those databases. You can get hundreds plus data points on individual people based on credit cards, all sorts of different data sources, and figure out whether they've voted or not recently, and whether, based on their profiles, they're likely to be a Trump voter. And what they did in at least one state was they made a database public of people who were no or low propensity voters who they thought would vote for Trump, and then people from that region could look and say, "Oh, that's my cousin," or "That's my brother," or "That's my aunt," and could claim that person and say, "I'm going to talk to them and I'm going to try to get them to the polls." And it was a completely different way of doing things, because what they found was that the people who are likely to vote for Trump weren't going to respond to people knocking on their doors. Right, the Democrat voters, knock on the doors. They're sort of they're more tend to be more susceptible to that kind of group, that kind of approach. But the Trumplican voters were more susceptible to somebody they know getting involved and getting them to vote. And so they created this very detailed, and this is part of the Musk money went in to this kind of ground game to get out the vote in places like Pennsylvania, for example. So it's that vote, that coalition is is very broad. The Amish, for example, the truckers, people like that, and that's why they Trump needs to deliver on the sort of things that a very broad range of Americans care about. And Americans don't understand, for example, why they're hurting economically and their money is going to things that are on this kind of USAID list that's getting circulated about some of the stuff that they're put their money on. So that was determinative, especially in the swing states.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I mean, I absolutely agree with you, and I've kind of heard this before because there was a ground level swell that they kind of were able to do along with the voter list management. That was what kind of made sure that the illegals that were there did not get the opportunity to vote,
In
and
some
they
places, it
yeah,
depends. It depended on the governor of the state.
yeah.
Yeah.
So they did a lot of work. There's no question. So out of the box is what we're going to expect from Trump. Coming towards the last segment, I want to ask you about the whole Islamic uh, radicalization which is happening, and Trump has had very strong views on radical Islam. He's been asked in an interview where he said, "Does Islam hate America?" And he said, "I think so." So you see those views combined with the views of uh, Mike Waltz, of Tulsi, who's extremely upset about Syria, extremely upset about what's happening in England for that matter, whole lot of things. When you look at this entire thing, and you also have the Democrats, or the, I would say, the leftist establishment that uses this nonsense. For example, in Bangladesh, what we are seeing is a rise of complete unadulterated jihadis. I mean, it's really funny. Uh, what do you think his policy is going to be with regards to, especially the radicalization that is spreading in one January 1st? We've had an attack already in America, and a lot of people are saying that's just the start. So, what do you think his policy is going to be about that? Because now these are things that affect the internal security. Because if it's, everybody remembers 9/11 immediately, and those memories come and haunt people. And America is very sentimental about 9/11, whatever you say. They're extremely sentimental about it because that's the first time somebody came and hit at home. So they have that, I won't call it a soft corner, but it's a very, very, it's a large vulnerability. So what do you think is going to be there? Looking at China involved in Afghanistan, China involved in Pakistan, you know, China involved in Africa, where all this stuff is happening. So how do you think they're going to kind of deal with this? What is their
Well, so
pragmatic approach, out of the box
yeah,
approach?
and if you remember, Trump went down to ground zero very soon after 9/11. New York was his city, so to speak, and he was and was immediately involved in reconstruction and things like that. Um, I I'm not sure. Um, uh, my understanding is, for example, he was very concerned about the Yazidi communities and others, but then then I'm not quite sure what happened with the Kurds, right? So I'm not. All I can do is look back at the first administration. I'm not sure. Um, but if I may, can I bring up a different topic? Okay, so I was at the inauguration of the president of Palau on the 16th of January. So it was before Trump came into office. And the reason I want to bring it up is Palau is one of those Pacific Island countries that recognizes Taiwan, and it's just the other side of the Philippines. And there was a very large, high-level Indian delegation, including a minister of state for external affairs, the highest level visit to the region that there had been, and they continued on to the Federated States of Micronesia and to Guam. And there was at the inauguration, there was the foreign minister of Taiwan came, and the question was who would have their photo taken with him, and because China ain't gonna like it. Right. And the foreign minister of Taiwan was there and he sat front and center. And on one side was the foreign minister of Japan, who sat right next to him. And on the other side was the minister of state for external affairs of India on the other side. And this was, before Trump had come into office. And for me, it was a really important symbol of, Indo-Pacific, uh, free and open Indo-Pacific, regardless of what happens in the U.S. That these they're willing to work together, and India showed up for the inauguration of the president of a country that recognizes Taiwan, knowing all that that entails, brought a large delegation by Indian standards, high-level delegation for the region by Indian standards, had some good meetings, and moved to some other countries across the region, so Pacific Island countries. So I think that that's worth taking note of. MEA has some very good people looking at the Pacific Islands, and is right there alongside the Japanese, and maybe
I'll give you
testing.
another story.
Yeah. Mhm.
So there's a think tank, Army associated think tank in India, who wrote an article about Tibet.
Mhm.
Right, the Chinese got so miffed about that article and so worried about that article that they came out with those, you know, uh, counties in Aksai Chin and all that area, because they got frightened. This is the first time Indian army is writing about Tibet. Oh bloody hell! So within a week they reacted and said, "Oh, these counties and all that stuff." Then they came out and said, "We're building a dam." Okay, we said we're building a dam too. So it's right now it's with China. It's like TikTok, tit for tat.
Mhm.
Uh, we make a move, they're making a move. It's a geopolitical game. Nobody wants to fight because they both of us know that we'll get hurt. But the geopolitical games are heating up quite a bit. I mean, it's there is cooperation as well. I'll tell you, in Bangladesh, there is a lot of cooperation between India and China because both our interests are in jeopardy and both have fire in their neighborhood, which none of them want. China is worried about Yunnan, which is again a Muslim, quite a predominant Muslim area, 800,000 to a million Muslims there in that region. Thailand has a lot of, northern Thailand has a lot of Muslims. Then you've got these Rohingyas running around the place. So he's worried about that. We are worried about Bangladesh. There's cooperation as well, but there's uh, this also which happens on the side. Finally, I want to ask you about
But just before moving on, so do you know what nationality is dominant in operating the small shops in Palau?
obviously Indian.
Bangladeshis.
Ah, see, I'll tell you what. I Bangladeshis today is in a very bad position in the sense people are worried to speak out, you know, and there are few. There's an actress who spoke out and said, "Kill me if you want," and she's in jail. I mean, she would be in jail or she's in jail. She's got 5-7 cases against her and this and that. It's a terrible scenario. So a lot of people who want to speak don't speak because I get emails from Bangladeshis. I mean, I have people calling me up and saying, "Sir, what have we done to our country? I mean, I'm so sorry that you as Indians have to listen to this because you gave your blood for our country. Almost 3,000 plus people died just to get our country independent, and today we are spitting on your face. It's terrible. We are so sorry." These are things also that I'm hearing. So it's not it's a nasty situation. But let me just say this: people abroad, they can see what's happening. They're a little more aware. Bangladeshis are still inside Bangladesh are still covered by a lot of propaganda, which is spread by people like Peter Haas, who's still there, by the way. He's the chief of Bangladesh Oil and Gas.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and one of the first deals that the Trump administration signed is with Bangladesh Oil and Gas for 5 million cubic feet of natural gas per year with a
To where?
company in the US to purchase from America to Bangladesh. Can you imagine of all the places? Look at the shipping costs. Apart from that, the company that they've signed the deal with has only one employee and has had no business records. I'll send you the details. I'm just missing the company name in my head right now.
Thank you.
There's one employee who signed the contract and there's no other business deals. There's nothing.
Mhm.
So, I mean, people are going to take advantage of Trump as well. There's this whole uniparty which is sitting there that's going to create chaos behind him. And that's something which is very interesting. But you said flood the zone, and I want to come back to that. That's a very interesting phrase that you use. So, would you kind of care to expand on flooding the zone? How is he planning to do this? What is his idea? And taking
That,
on
that,
Russia, China,
it-
India, everybody all together. It's
so this is if there's uh, there are different shows to YouTube, or usually Rumble actually, shows to watch if you want to understand different sections of what's happening. So Charlie Kirk, for example, and Rich Barris were very much about the voter aspect of it, getting out the vote, things like that. For me, one of the ways to understand uh, what's potentially going on in part of the administration is Steve Bannon, and that term "flood the zone," comes out of the war room, comes out of Steve Bannon's show, and quite a few of his correspondents have gone into the administration, including Beatty and Besant, and quite a few of the people who've been on his show have ended up in parts of the administration. Navarro, for example. Um, so there are this flood the zone thing is basically you just throw so much at what they consider the opposition that it's very difficult for them to respond. So you go after USAID and justice, and offer buyouts to the CIA, and you just do so much that it becomes it's a sporting analogy, where you just kind of throw so many players onto a part of the field that the opposing team is overwhelmed. Um, but I'd recommend watching. Bannon is on for like 4 hours a day. and I mean, he just had, he has on people like, yeah, yesterday, somebody, his studio is right across, is very close to the White House. So he had somebody who came directly, who had been working at the White House all day, working on the confirmations, and then just walks right into, who's somebody who's regularly on Bannon's show, walked into the studio to talk about some of the issues with confirmations. And it works like a unit, in part. So that this guy is helping with the confirmations on the Hill, and then if they've got a problem with somebody like they potentially had with Pete Hegseth, the the Bannon talks to the War Room Posse, which is the viewership, and tells them, call your senators or call your whatever, and they've got they are I can't remember what the numbers were, but they actually talked about how many thousands of phone calls that individual senators were getting to confirm uh, the cabinet picks, Trump's cabinet picks. So several people who were considered to be not very likely to pass, then you end up with Bannon's War Room Posse just inundating them, and which is an implicit kind of threat, especially combined with Musk saying we're going to primary you if you don't get these people through. So Musk is saying I've got the money to primary you, and then their constituents are saying you don't do what we want, we're going to vote against you, and then you start to see all these confirmations go through. So it's sort of watching the administration come together in real time. It's fascinating. But that term "flood the zone" comes. I heard it from that show.
now that's very interesting. Thank you for telling me that, because I've always had an interest to figure out the back end politics, which is dirty at best, murky at worst, or whatever. I mean, it's pretty interesting to see how the whole chain works, because what you're also seeing is a uniparty in the middle who's trying to destabilize from both the sides. It's not just the Republicans or the Democrats. It's actually Republicans and the Democrats who sit together and
So it
kind
it
of
has
make up.
been, but now there's kind of two Republican parties, right? There's the traditional
Yeah.
Republican Party and there's the Trumplicans.
Hmm.
And the Trumplicans are just as mad at their fellow Republicans who aren't towing the line or who aren't supporting Trump's. The Bannon's line is that Trump, got shot in the head, and then a few months later won an overwhelming popular vote victory. He gets the cabinet he wants, even if Bannon personally doesn't particularly like them. Trump gets the cabinet he wants, and that war room machine, which is tied into, the just all sorts. Bannon is a very interesting guy, tied into a whole bunch of different networks. Can really apply pressure, and you saw it with specifically Joni Ernst, Senator Joni Ernst, who's a Republican senator who is waffling a bit on Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, and they went after her. She's what's called in cycle, which means she'll be up for re-election in 2 years, and you had direct threats to primary her. They identified somebody who they would run against her, publicly name them. They started with the phone calls, all that stuff, and not only did she buckle, she's now on Doge. She's sort of heading up. She's one of the main people on the Doge caucus, or whatever you want to call it, working with Trump, working with Musk, even though Musk had previously kind of been in the background threatening to fund a primary challenge. So it's that the uniparty is being broken up. It's part of this deconstruction, and the Trumplicans they're moving. I mean, who knows? Time will tell how effective it is, but it is fascinating to watch, and you can see a lot of it on Bannon. It's on Rumble. You just go to BANNON, Bannon's War Room, and it's 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and then 2 hours on Saturday. I have no idea how he does it, but it's very inside baseball about what's going on the Hill.
Interesting. Cleo, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having a conversation with you. It's fun to talk about what's happening in the world, and especially with the whole churn, or geopolitical churn, as they say, which is happening around. It's going to be even more interesting to keep a track. So thank you so much for your time, and hope to see you again from another place, another country, probably,
Yeah, I
that
hope
you'll be
so.
traveling to. Mhm.
I'm overdue for India, and I'd just like to thank any viewer who stuck around this long. Thank you for
Oh yeah,
your
people will trust me.
time, and thank you to you for your dedication to keeping these conversations going and
Thank you so much.
sharing your knowledge. Thank
When
you.
you're in India, give us a shout out. We will come. We'll probably catch up for a podcast as well.
I'd like
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank
Namaskar.
you. Bye.